So my husband passed away unexpectedly last year. He was 39. It completely took us all by shock. We have 3 little boys, 10, 9, and 6.
And it's only been a year. How did you go from processing death to I need to write a book and help others?
You know, I just watched the struggle that my kids were going through and trying to find something that we could use to cope at night.
In 2009, inside a Home Depot in a small Utah town, a young cashier named Kouri caught the eye of a construction worker named Eric. He came in often, more often than any project could explain, and everyone around him seemed to know exactly why. He wanted her number badly, but he was too nervous to ask for it himself. So he did what a lot of shy men do. He sent a friend in to get it for him. It worked. Eric asked Kouri out, and from the very first date, something clicked. She was sharp, quick-witted, the kind of person who noticed details other people missed. He was steady, hard-working, the kind of man who showed up early and stayed late. Friends say the two of them simply fit, the way certain people do when you meet them together for the first time and cannot imagine either one without the other. When Kouri told her family she was seeing someone new, her older brother did what any protective sibling would do. He braced himself to dislike him. Big brothers are supposed to be tough on the men their sisters bring home, and Kouri, by her own family's account, was terrified of that first meeting. But Eric disarmed him almost instantly. He was easy to talk to, easy to trust, the kind of guy other men wanted to grab a beer with. Within a short time, he was not just accepted into the family, he felt like he had always belonged there. In 2013, Eric and Kouri got married. Not long after, they started a family of their own, first Carter, then Ashton, then Weston. 3 boys born close together who would grow up idolizing their father in a way that people around them noticed constantly. Eric, by every account from the people who loved him, was the kind of father who did not just provide, he participated. He coached, he taught, he showed up to every practice and every game he could. He was, as one family member put it, a natural at fatherhood, someone who made it look effortless even when it clearly was not. While Eric built a name for himself in stonemasonry, turning raw labor into a thriving business, Kouri carved out her own path in real estate. She was not simply selling homes, she was flipping them, buying properties in rough shape, fixing them up, and turning a profit when they sold. Those who worked with her describe a woman who had something rare, real intelligence paired with real instinct, the kind of person who could read a market and read a room with equal skill. She was, by nearly every description offered about her in those early years, brilliant, savvy, someone people wanted on their side of a deal. Together, Eric and Kouri built a life that looked from the outside like something out of a magazine. Their businesses grew side by side, his in construction, hers in real estate, and the money followed. They traveled, they hunted, they lived well, spending on the things they valued without much hesitation. Eric's passion outside of work was hunting, and he would disappear for weeks at a time chasing it, sometimes 4 or 5 months spread across a year. It was, by all appearances, simply part of who he was and part of the rhythm the family had grown used to. Their extended families grew close as well. Eric's sisters, Katie and Amy, became familiar faces at birthdays and holidays. Kouri's mother, Lisa, and her brothers, Ronnie and DJ, spoke of the Richins family the way people speak about relatives they have folded seamlessly into their own. There was warmth on both sides, genuine warmth, the kind that is difficult to fake and even harder to imagine unraveling. By the time their youngest son, Weston, was old enough to walk, the Richins family had become, in the eyes of nearly everyone around them, the picture of a happy American household. A devoted father, a driven, capable mother. 3 healthy boys growing up surrounded by love, opportunity, and a level of comfort many families spend a lifetime chasing. Friends would later describe Eric and Kouri as being, in the months before everything changed, at the best point they had ever been in their marriage. Not perfect, no marriage ever truly is, but strong, connected, and seemingly built to last. And yet, beneath that surface, there were quiet pressures most outsiders never saw. A business built on debt that has to be repaid before it turns a profit. A marriage negotiating the ordinary friction of 2 ambitious people pulling in different directions, one wanting more time at home, the other chasing one more deal, one more flip, one more version of the life they were building. None of it, on its own, seemed like anything more than what every long marriage carries. But there were other things too, smaller things that would only matter later. A warning, spoken once and then forgotten, that if anything ever happened to Eric, his family should look closely at the person standing closest to him. A financial picture that was not quite as simple as it appeared from the outside, a tension that existed just beneath all that warmth, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. At the time, none of it seemed important. It was just life, messy and imperfect the way every family's life is. Nobody around Eric and Kouri Richins in those years believed they were watching the opening chapter of a story that would end in a courtroom, a life sentence, and 3 young boys forced to grow up faster than any child should have to. But they were. On the evening of March 3, 2022, there was something worth celebrating in the Richins household. Kouri had just landed the deal of a lifetime, a nearly 10-acre estate tucked in the Heber Valley, close enough to Park City to see the ski runs from the property line. It was the kind of house that most flippers only dream about finding, a 20,000-square-foot mansion, abandoned mid-construction, sitting untouched for 2 years until Kouri spotted its potential. An accountant had run the numbers and told her that if she could pull it off and stay under budget, she could walk away with as much as $12 million. It was a staggering leap from the less than $4 million she had agreed to pay for it, and by every account, Eric was right there with her that night, raising a glass to what felt like the beginning of something enormous. Kouri made him a drink to mark the occasion, a Moscow Mule vodka and ginger beer poured into a copper mug, a small, ordinary gesture between 2 people who had built an entire life out of taking chances together. They went to bed around 9:15, an early night by most standards, but not unusual for a family with 3 young boys and an early morning ahead of them. At some point that night, Kouri went to check on Ashton, the 9-year-old, who had a history of bad nightmares. When she came back to bed, she noticed something wrong. Eric felt cold. She pushed on him, tried to wake him, and got nothing back. It was after 3 in the morning when she called 911. The dispatcher walked her through CPR while she waited for help to arrive, her voice breaking, her hands moving on instinct while her mind struggled to catch up with what was happening in front of her. By the time first responders reached the house, there was nothing left to do. Eric Richins was gone, 39 years old, a husband, a father of 3, a man who had built a business and a family with his own 2 hands, dead in the bed his wife had just been lying beside hours earlier. Kouri's mother, Lisa, arrived to find her daughter collapsed on the floor, sobbing in a way that seemed to come from somewhere beyond ordinary grief. Kouri's brothers, Ronnie and DJ, were there too, watching their sister fall apart in real time, unable to do anything but hold her together as best they could. In the other room, the 3 boys sat huddled on the couch, old enough to understand that something terrible had happened, too young to fully grasp what it meant, watching ambulance lights flash through the windows of the only home they had ever known. The first responders on scene floated an early theory: an aneurysm, something sudden, something unpredictable, something nobody could have prevented or seen coming. For a grieving family desperate for an explanation, it was almost a mercy. It gave them a story they could hold on to, tragic, blameless, final. That story did not survive the autopsy. Weeks later, the medical examiner's findings came back, and the word aneurysm was replaced by something far more troubling: fentanyl. Not a small amount either, but a dose so massive that investigators would later describe it as many times what a person could survive. Fentanyl, for those unfamiliar with it, is not a drug that forgives miscalculation. It is exponentially more potent than the oxycodones and other opioids most people picture when they hear the word overdose, a substance where the margin between a recreational dose and a fatal one can be measured in fractions of a gram. For Eric's family, the shift from aneurysm to fentanyl did not read as a random tragedy. It read as something they had feared long before anyone said the word murder out loud. According to people close to Eric, he had, at some point before his death, told relatives something that would only take on its full weight in hindsight, that if anything ever happened to him, they needed to look closely at the person standing beside him. At the time, it may have sounded like nothing more than the kind of dark joke people make in passing. After his death, it sounded like a warning nobody had taken seriously enough. Kouri's family, for their part, had a different explanation ready almost immediately. Eric, they said, was not a stranger to recreational drug use. He liked to unwind with THC gummies most evenings, and according to her brother Ronnie, he was not always careful about where those gummies came from, sometimes buying them from people on the street rather than licensed dispensaries. It was not a stretch, in their eyes, to imagine that a batch had been contaminated, that Eric had unknowingly taken something laced with fentanyl, the same tragic story playing out in households across the country as the drug supply grew more dangerous by the year. Two very different explanations, one an accident born of bad luck and a dangerous drug supply, the other something far darker, sat side by side in the weeks that followed. For over a year, the official version of events remained closer to the first. Kouri Richins had died of an accidental overdose, case closed. The lead detective himself told Kouri as much, informing her that the investigation was finished, that there was nothing more to uncover. Kouri's family exhaled. They believed, as anyone would, that the worst was behind them, that grief alone was the only battle left to fight. Kouri began the long, slow process of rebuilding a life for herself and her 3 sons, one day at a time, one small step at a time, believing the door on this chapter had finally closed. What none of them knew, what nobody outside a small circle of investigators knew, was that the door had never actually closed at all. Quietly, carefully, questions were still being asked, and the answers being uncovered were about to turn a grieving widow into something no one in that house could have imagined. For months after Eric's death, Kouri Richins looked exactly like what she was supposed to be, a young widow trying to survive the unimaginable. Those closest to her say it took nearly 2 months before she could bring herself to sleep in the bedroom she had shared with her husband, the same room where she had woken up beside his lifeless body. She was, by every account from her family, a woman completely undone by loss, going through the motions of daily life while carrying a grief that never seemed to lighten. Her 3 sons were struggling too. Carter, Ashton, and Weston had all seen the ambulances, all sat together on the couch that night, not fully understanding what was happening around them, and in the weeks that followed, that confusion turned into something harder to manage. Outbursts, withdrawal, the kind of grief children carry without having the words to explain it. Kouri's brother Ronnie would later describe it simply: the boys needed help, and so did she. Out of that need, something unexpected took shape. In March 2023, 1 year after Eric's death, Kouri decided to write a children's book. She called it Are You With Me? A story about a young boy who loses his father, only to be shown, gently, that his father's presence never truly disappears. In the pages of that book, Eric became something like a guardian, always nearby, always watching, present in Christmas mornings and quiet smiles even though he could no longer be seen. She promoted it on a local morning show, sitting in front of cameras and explaining, in a voice that sounded exactly like a mother trying to help her children heal, that she simply wanted a story to read to her boys at night, so she decided to write one herself. To everyone watching, it was a beautiful, almost redemptive moment. Tragedy transformed into something meaningful, pain turned into a tool for healing. Her mother, Lisa, called it therapeutic, something that helped not just the boys, but Kouri herself. For a family that had spent over a year buried in grief, it finally felt like they were being allowed to breathe again, like the worst chapter of their lives was closing and a new one, however painful, was quietly beginning. But while Kouri was sitting under television lights talking about grief and healing, something else was happening in the background, something she did not know about, or perhaps did not want to think about. Investigators had never fully closed the door on Eric's death, and in the months surrounding the release of her book, they had quietly begun pulling threads that led somewhere far darker than an accidental overdose. One of those threads led straight to her phone. Detectives had been reviewing her internet search history, and what they found raised uncomfortable questions. Searches asking whether deleted text messages could be recovered from an iPhone. searches asking whether the FBI could retrieve deleted messages. And perhaps most chilling of all, a search asking a simple, direct question: what is a lethal dose of fentanyl? Kouri's attorney would later argue there was an innocent explanation, that those searches came after Eric's death, born out of fear and confusion as she found herself under suspicion, not evidence of anything sinister beforehand. But to investigators building a case, the timing mattered less than the questions themselves. Another thread led to a woman named Carmen Lauber, a house cleaner who had worked for Kouri's business and inside her home. Lauber had a criminal history involving drugs, and at the time investigators spoke with her, she was on probation for multiple drug distribution charges. What she told detectives would become one of the most consequential pieces of the entire case, though at the time, it remained hidden from public view, a quiet thread being pulled in an investigation the world did not yet know existed. And then there were the stories that had never been fully explained, stories Eric's family had been quietly carrying since long before his death. They said this was not the first time they believed Kouri had tried to poison him. The first time, they claimed, was in 2019 during a family vacation in Greece when Eric became violently ill after Kouri handed him a drink. Kouri's family offered a far simpler explanation, that Eric was on medication that should not have been mixed with alcohol, that he had asked for a virgin drink and the request had simply been ignored by a waitress, that Kouri had called his doctor, gotten him the right care, and had him back on his feet by that same night. The second alleged incident, Eric's family said, happened just weeks before his death, on Valentine's Day, 2022. Kouri, they claimed, brought him a sandwich that left him breaking out in hives and struggling to breathe after a single bite. Kouri's family dismissed this too, insisting it was nothing more than a bad piece of food, pointing out that Eric napped it off and went on to coach one of his son's games later that same day. Hardly the behavior of a man who believed he had just been poisoned. Two families, two very different versions of the same handful of moments, sitting quietly beneath the surface, while the public saw only a grieving widow promoting a book about healing. Then, only weeks after Kouri sat under those studio lights describing how the book had helped her family find peace, everything changed again. In May 2023, police arrived, not with condolences, but with handcuffs. The headline that followed would ripple across the country within hours. A Utah mother who had written a children's book about coping with the loss of her husband was now the one being accused of ending his life. What had looked, for over a year, like a story about survival was suddenly being told as something else entirely. A story about a woman who may have known exactly what happened to her husband because she was the one who made it happen. The arrest landed like a shockwave. For Kouri's family, the news felt almost impossible to absorb, a betrayal of everything they believed they knew about her. Her mother, Lisa, would later say that anyone who truly knew her daughter understood one simple truth. She could not have done this. She would never do this. To them, Kouri was not a killer. She was a grieving mother who had just spent a year trying to hold her family together, and now she was being torn away from her sons at the exact moment they needed her most. But Eric's family told a different story, one they said they had been carrying since the very beginning. According to court documents, they had suspected Kouri almost immediately, long before any autopsy results, long before any arrest. And buried inside that suspicion was a detail that had remained hidden from the public for over a year, a secret trust. Sometime before his death, Eric had quietly placed his estate into a trust without telling Kouri, naming his sister Katie to oversee it. According to those close to him, he had done this to protect his sons in case his marriage did not survive the strain it had been under. It was a decision born, by his family's account, out of caution, a quiet insurance policy against a future he was not yet ready to give up on. Kouri, according to court documents, knew nothing about that trust until after Eric was already gone. That secret came violently to the surface just 2 days after his death, when Kouri went looking through a safe in the home, a safe that reportedly held somewhere between $125,000 and $165,000 in cash. Eric's sister, Amy, tried to stop her from opening it, and what followed was a physical altercation between the two women, one that ended with Kouri facing an assault charge she would later resolve with a no-contest plea. Kouri's brothers, who were present, insisted the confrontation had been mutual, both women pushing, both women swinging, not the one-sided attack Amy later described. It was a small, ugly moment, but it revealed something larger, a fracture between two families who had once shared birthdays and holidays, now standing on opposite sides of a suspicion neither side could yet prove. If the emotional case against Kouri was murky, the financial case prosecutors were building was not. According to court documents, at the time of Eric's death, there were at least 6 life insurance policies on him, together worth nearly $3 million. 2 months before he died, prosecutors alleged, Kouri had forged his signature to secure yet another policy, this one worth an additional $100,000. She was also accused of siphoning money from Eric's personal accounts and misusing funds from his business over a period of years. And according to prosecutors, Kouri needed that money badly. Her house-flipping business, the same business that had once seemed like the foundation of the couple's success, was reportedly drowning in nearly $2 million of debt. A premarital agreement had stripped her of any claim to Eric's business assets, with one critical exception: if he died while they were still legally married, everything changed. Prosecutors argued it was, quite simply, worth more to her for Eric to die than to divorce him. Kouri's attorney pushed back hard against nearly all of it, insisting the forgery allegations were false, that the debt was a normal, unremarkable part of how house flipping worked, lines of credit taken out and repaid the moment a property sold, not evidence of some desperate financial spiral. According to her family, Eric had not only known about every dollar coming in and out of their finances, he had actively supported Kouri's boldest business move yet, the mansion purchase they had been celebrating on the very night he died. But the money was not the only motive investigators were circling. As the case developed, another thread emerged, one that complicated the picture even further. Testimony describing Kouri as a woman who had felt trapped inside her marriage, who had been carrying on a relationship outside of it for some time. It was not simply about an inheritance anymore. It was about a future she may have already been imagining for herself, one that did not include Eric at all. At the center of it all stood Carmen Lauber, the house cleaner with the drug distribution record, whose testimony would become one of the most damaging pieces of evidence prosecutors had. Lauber told investigators that in early 2022, Kouri had reached out asking her to procure fentanyl, claiming it was for an investor recovering from a back injury. According to Lauber, she purchased between 15 and 30 fentanyl pills and passed them along to Kouri. Cell phone data would later place Lauber's phone near known drug pickup locations on dates that lined up disturbingly close to both the Valentine's Day incident and the night Eric died. All of this, the searches, the trust, the safe, the debt, the affair, the pills, came pouring out publicly for the first time during a bail hearing in June 2023. For 4 hours, Kouri sat in handcuffs beside her attorney while prosecutors laid out their case, witness by witness, piece by piece. It was, as one observer put it, less like a routine bail hearing and more like a trial in miniature, a preview of the storm still to come. By the end of that hearing, one truth had become impossible to ignore. This was no longer simply a grieving family accusing a widow out of pain and suspicion. This was a criminal case, built on phone records, financial documents, and a woman with direct knowledge of how the fentanyl had moved from a dealer's hands into the Richins' home. What had started as a private disagreement between two grieving families was about to become a public reckoning, and the full weight of that reckoning was still waiting, months away, inside a courtroom that would finally decide who was telling the truth. By the time Kouri Richins walked into a Utah courtroom in February 2026, nearly 4 years had passed since the night her husband died. What had once been a private tragedy inside one family's home had become one of the most closely watched murder trials in the country, and over the course of 3 grueling weeks, the full weight of the case against her was finally laid bare. Prosecutors called more than 40 witnesses to the stand. Detectives walked jurors through the timeline of Eric's death, the phone searches, the fentanyl found in his system at 5 times the lethal dose. Carmen Lauber returned to testify in detail about the pills she had purchased and passed along, and cell phone data once again placed her near known pickup locations on dates that matched Kouri's alleged attempts to poison her husband. A private investigator hired by Eric's family described the pattern of behavior they had documented for years. Even the man Kouri had been seeing outside her marriage took the stand, describing a conversation that stunned the courtroom into silence, a moment when Kouri had reportedly asked him what it felt like to kill someone. Perhaps the most damaging moment of the entire trial did not come from a witness at all, but from Kouri's own words. Detectives had recovered handwritten notes from her nightstand, describing the night Eric died in unsettling detail, his body cold, his skin pale. An urge she described feeling that something was wrong. Prosecutors also introduced text messages between Kouri and her brother, messages that revealed something quietly devastating. The children's grief book she had spent a year presenting to the world as her own healing process had actually been written by someone else. In her own words, she had used it to learn the writing process, preparing, she said, for something bigger. The very story she had told the public, a mother pouring her pain onto the page to help her sons, had been, at least in part, a performance. Through all of it, the defense made a decision that surprised many watching the trial. When it came time to present their own case, they called no witnesses at all. Their strategy rested on a single argument that prosecutors had never definitively proven exactly how the fentanyl entered Eric's system. That suspicion, however strong, was not the same as certainty. It was a bet that the burden of proof alone might be enough to create doubt. It was not enough. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for only a matter of hours. They returned with guilty verdicts on every major count: aggravated murder, attempted aggravated murder, insurance fraud, and forgery. The story that had begun with a phone call at 3 a.m. had finally reached its legal conclusion. 4 years, 1 trial, and a single word, guilty, that changed everything. The sentencing hearing took place in May 2026, on a date that felt almost impossible to ignore, what would have been Eric's 44th birthday. The courtroom that day held a kind of grief that no verdict could resolve. Social workers and therapists stood before the judge and read statements written by the couple's 3 sons, now between the ages of 9 and 13, boys who had grown up faster than any child should have to. Their words were plain, direct, and devastating. They described fear, not of a stranger, but of their own mother. They said they did not want her released, ever, that they would not feel safe in a world where that was even possible. One of them wrote that he had been forced to become a parent to his younger brothers, watching over them in ways no child his age should have had to learn. Kouri stood at the podium in a jail uniform and addressed her sons directly for the first time since her arrest. She told them she had never abandoned them, that she loved them, that one day the truth would come out and they would understand. She maintained, as she had from the very beginning, that she was innocent, calling the verdict an absolute lie. She asked them simply not to give up on her. Judge Richard Mrazek was not swayed. In handing down his decision, he said plainly that a person capable of the things Kouri Richins had done was simply too dangerous to ever be free. He sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the harshest penalty available under her conviction. Her attorneys have said they intend to appeal, a reminder that even now, this story has not fully closed its final chapter. What remains, long after the verdicts and the headlines fade, is the quiet, permanent cost carried by 3 young boys. They lost their father in the home where they were supposed to feel safest, and in the years since, they have had to learn a harder truth than any child should ever be asked to carry, that the person who was supposed to protect them may have been the one who took that safety away. They are being raised now by their aunt and uncle, growing up in the shadow of a case that will likely follow them for the rest of their lives, whether they choose to speak about it or not. There are no winners in a story like this one. There is only what was lost, a father who will never see his sons grow up, and 3 boys who will spend the rest of their lives carrying the weight of a truth their mother still refuses to accept. If this case affected you the way it affected us, let us know in the comments below. And if you want to be here for the next case we uncover, make sure you are subscribed, because this will not be the last story that reminds us how dangerous the people closest to us can sometimes be.